The film Martyrs is considered to be part of New French Extremity, which is a term used to define the collection of transgressive French horror films that came out in the early 2000s. These films have a commonality in their use of excessive or extreme depictions of violence and are often dismissed as employing violence for the sake of violence. But that reading of Martyrs is completely dismissive of the underlying messages. This video essay will focus on Martyrs from a feminist perspective. It will demonstrate that the film uses the abject in a progressive way that attempts to subvert society's patriarchal constructions. The abject refers to the human reaction to a threatened breakdown in meaning caused by the loss of distinction between the subject and the object, or the self and the other. The abject is what disturbs identity, system, and order. Horror films such as The Exorcist have employed the abject to reinforce the patriarchal views of women as the monstrous other. For example, Regan's possession makes her excrete vomit and urine, she has gaping wounds on her body, and her body is considered sexually transgressive because of her masturbation. These are all characteristics of the abject inflicted upon the female body. The end of the film shows Father Karras committing suicide in order to finally kill the demon. It is therefore the male figure in The Exorcist that saves the day, in turn reinforcing female weakness and male dominance, a cornerstone of the Western construction of society. From start to finish, the film Martyrs depicts gut-wrenching violence. It is not in any way enjoyable for the average viewer, like for example Saw, which uses gimmicky contraptions to depict the most violent deaths imaginable, and in this, entertain the audience. Martyrs forces the audience to question the nature of this violence and its implications in our world. Through its employment of the abject, the film does not reinforce our patriarchal systems, like many reactionary conservative horror films. Instead, Martyrs uses the abject to question the patriarchal structures that are in place and functions to empower women. The abject is theorized to reside in the id, the space of our subconscious that holds our fears and desires. The monster that terrorized Lucy, as we find out, is the embodiment of Lucy's guilt over leaving a girl behind after escaping the cult as a child. This monstrous being resides in Lucy's id and is manifested as a disfigured female character. This monster therefore is abject because it is a result of Lucy's loss of distinction between herself and the other. In a pivotal scene in which we find out the monster is a figment of Lucy's imagination, the camera switches between Lucy's interaction with the monster and Anna's point of view, showing Lucy inflicting wounds upon herself. It is not the monster's doing, as the monster does not actually exist. This example of the abject does not focus on the women as a monstrous other, though the monster is embodied as a tortured woman. The only reason she exists at all is a result of the terrible abuse she suffered at the hands of the cult. Lucy does not hate the monster. She fears it. But most importantly, she empathizes with it. She killed the monsters to absolve her of her survivor's guilt, saying they're dead, they won't hurt you again. The film therefore demonstrates that the cult is the cause of this abject depiction. The specific demographic of the cult speaks to those in power in society, namely rich white people. Here it is also worth mentioning that both Lucy and Anna are not white. This fact forces the audience to consider effects of our patriarchal society on women and the abuse and oppression they face as a result of it, either directly or indirectly. After Anna is captured by the same cult that tortured Lucy 15 years earlier, she is subject to brutal torture. She is fed a substance that resembles vomit and is forced to pee and poo in a metal bucket. Her head is shaved and she is severely beaten to the point that her face is completely bruised and cut up. This depiction of abjection does not function to demonstrate the female as other or monstrous. The shaving of her head even functions to defeminize her in a way. She is tortured at the hands of men, systematically and clinically, just as a patriarchal society functions to abuse people, especially women. The climax further employs the abject to create a feminist statement. After prolonged torture, Anna is skinned alive. It is in this moment the cult believes she has reached the state of transfiguration, meaning they believe she is able to see the afterlife that, as Mademoiselle explained, can only be reached by women. In an important scene, the camera closes up on Anna's face, as her eyes stare directly into the camera. Her stare into the camera is pleading. It makes the audience complicit in these horrendous acts and forces us to question the real-world implications of this visceral violence. The skinning of Anna is a literal removing of her boundaries, that which separates her from the world around her, just as the state of transfiguration allows her to occupy the liminal space between life and death. Anna is in a space that creates disgust, horror, and fear in the viewer. Despite this monstrous space occupied by Anna, she is able to utilize it and become powerful. Anna's telling of what she saw in this transcended state results in the Mademoiselle's eventual suicide. This therefore demonstrates Anna's immense power and ability to push past the system that abused her, and though she did not necessarily survive, was able to bring the system down, as its leader committing suicide is sure to leave the cult in an imbalanced and fragile state. Martyrs' use of extreme violence and female suffering caused many to dismiss the movie as violence for violence sake or as misogynistic. It's ironic that these same accusations are not, by the general populations, hurled at such classic horror films like Halloween or other 80s slashers that follow patriarchal ideals. When compared with past horror films that use the abject to reinforce patriarchal ideals, it is obvious that Martyr uses the abject to fight against patriarchal society. The use of the abject throughout the film, and especially Anna's literal embodiment of abjection, demonstrates the power that director Pascal Laugier sees in women and the ability of people to go beyond the patriarchy and see what lies ahead, just as Anna did.